We face a 3-bet by MP. We come in for the 4-bet. And my opponent calls. Flop is 9-5 deuce, two-toned. We have the ace of clubs. We have a gutter with the ace deuce. We have an overpair, of course. We decide to pot. My opponent comes in for the raise. And we are in terrible shape on the flop against a hand that is dominating me very heavily. Hey everyone, what's up? And welcome back to a new episode here with some pot Limit Omaha content. Today, we're going to jump into some of the biggest hands that I played over the past 12 months. And we're going to analyze them one by one. Some of them we're going to look a little bit deeper into that. But more importantly, give all of you an idea of how did I perform over the past year. So here you see my Hold'em Manager database. I played 114,000 hands in 2020. I won a little bit over 6,000 euro playing poker here, and we're gonna see what basically happened. First of all, 114,000 hands isn't a massive amount of hands, obviously. I know that, I understand that, but I'm still totally fine with it. I got some other obligations as well in my life and in my profession where I want to focus and put attention on. So it's not all about playing poker for me all the time. Anyway, I'm still very happy with the amount of hands that I played. I'm very happy with how much I did work on poker strategy, improving my game, working on my game, and trying to become better. Now, today, we're going to look into some of the biggest pots that I played. I'm going to use Hold'em Manager here to give all of you a better insight into those hands. So first things, what we want to do is we want to set a filter in Hold'em Manager 3 here to filter for the biggest hands of the year. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going over here to the quick filter setting here. I'm going to open it and I'm going to click on filter editor. Now this window will pop up here, and in here you're going to go to showdown and hand info. At least I'm going to go there now. And this tab basically allows you to filter for hands that you won or lost over an X amount of big blinds. So I'm going to go to player won or lost, and I'm going to set it to greater than 200 big blinds. So I'm going to filter here for all the hands that I either won or lost more than 200 big blinds over the past year. Going to click OK here, and as you can see, I got 21 hands lined up here that I actually played that were bigger than 200 big blinds, winning or losing. So in this first video, I'm going to go over the first 10 hands, and then I'm going to add another video later on as well, where we're going to go into the other 10 or basically 11 hands, of course. So I'm going to select all these hands here. 21 are in there. I'm going to filter for the first 10. So 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 here. Going to filter for those hands here. Click on the replay setting, and they are all lined up in here. So the first hand here is played at PLO 25 cent, 50 cent. We're playing on party poker here, and we're sitting in a cutoff with ace queen 5-3 single suited to the ace. Early position opens, and I decide to make a cold call here, which I'm not that happy with. Like, we're playing a high rake environment, which means that we want to be very careful and selective with our passive pre-flop actions, which cold calling is. So we're only cold calling a very selective group of hands here, and I don't really think that this hand does fit in there. Maybe on the button where we have absolute position, we can get away with it a little bit more, but like here, I don't really see it being that profitable. So not too happy with the call. We do call, the button also calls, and the big blind comes in as well. Flop is Jack 5 deuce, two-toned. We have middle pair, a nut flush draw, and a gutter to the straight. So we have a very strong hand, especially when it comes to equity and nuttiness here. The big blind checks. The early position player comes in with a bet of around 2/3 pot, and we have a decision to make. We can definitely call here. Our hand plays fine as a call. We have that nuttiness potential if we do make the flush, for example. It's also very likely that the straight is good on this texture. So calling would definitely be fine. However, I think that my hand plays a little bit better as a raise. We have so much equity basically on the flop here that by raising, we can put pressure on our opponents. We can even fold out some better made hands for sure by raising. And if the money would go in here on the flop, like, we cannot go that wrong, of course, because we do so well against the majority of our opponent's stack of range. So I personally like a raise here, and I did raise it up. Now the button comes in for the all-in. Early position stacks off. Also, the money will go in, and we river the straight here with the ace-3. And our opponents did show up with top set, the button, like a very nice flop for him, of course. And the early position player had top 2 pair, basically. So very nice hands for all 3 of us, basically. This hand I actually analyzed earlier this year already, also here on YouTube, with an in-depth video about squeezing pre-flop as well as post-flop strategy. So I will put a link up here as well. If you want to check it out, make sure to do so. And here we are playing a 3-bet pot situation. So we're sitting in a small blind, ace 4-4, single suited. The cutoff open raises. The button comes in for the call. We squeeze and both players call. We sit out of position here. SPR is around 2 here, and we're flopping middle set on jack 4-3. It's a very dry board, of course. It's a great board for our squeezing range. We will have a lot of aces, some kings. We will have some rundowns with a jack X combination. So basically, the majority of our range, of course, does well here and can profitably stack off. Now, the question still is, like, do we always bet here, or do we sometimes check? And what would we do with our hand here, which is middle set? Now, I did decide to come in for a pot bet here. My opponent in the cutoff calls. The button raises, so the money goes in here. The turn is the 9 of clubs. The river is the 6 of clubs. And we win a nice pot here of $163 here, playing PLO 25 cent, 50 cent again. Now, our opponent in the cutoff shows up with ace, king, king, 10. An overpair of kings there with the backdoor flush draw, backdoor straight draw. And the button has a very wide and weak hand here. But on the flop, of course, he has a very strong hand, having a pair and a wrap. Anyway, let's see what we can learn from this situation, because I did open up the sim here as well. And just to give all of you a quick idea here and some side notes on this situation. On this board, which is very good for our squeezing range, we can bet with a very high frequency. As you can see, we're betting 78% of the time with our range, but we're still checking 22%. And that is because some hands do actually totally miss, which makes us want to check those hands. And therefore, we actually should implement also some checks to protect that checking range. Not only do we want protection with our checking range, but also some hands heavily block our opponent's stack of range, which makes checking higher EV than betting, because if we bet, it's so likely our opponents will actually fold. And one of those candidates to basically check with, because first of all, we need protection with our checking range, but more importantly also, it's unlikely our opponents will actually stack off, are all the sets. So any hand that is 3-3, 4-4, or jack-jack, you can see it here, they are actually all supposed to be a check here. So my hand, middle set, is not a great candidate to bet here. And also, like, I didn't really realize that even on dry boards like this, we're not stacking off our entire range here. We're not betting everything. We're still checking 22%, and therefore we need to make sure to put in some strong hands there. Sets, very often in those scenarios, whenever we do want to check strong hands in 3-bet pot, sets are often one of the first choices there. So, one side note here to make is that the solver, what we're looking at here, Monker solver, our opponents are capable of creatively bet folding on the flop if we check. And therefore, there is some extra EV gained by checking, because our opponents will bluff. Now, in reality, you have to ask yourself, are my opponents bet folding enough often here on the flop to make those checks higher EV than betting? If you look, for example, at a check here, you can see that the cutoff here is betting 11% of the time for half pot, and the button here is betting 27% of the time for half pot. And if you then get check raised, like, he's still bet folding 35% of the time. And then I doubt whether that happens in reality. If people bet fold here, like king, king, 3 deuce, for example, ace, 6 deuce, deuce, like those hands, And whenever that is the case, like there are better arguments also for betting some of these hands. So it's probably going to be close. It's hard to find the ultimate answer there. What's important to realize is that we do want to check some strong hands, but that we also should realize that our opponents may be not bluffing enough often if we check. Okay, so we have ace 4-4, clear check as mentioned. However, we do pot. Our opponent was sitting on ace king 10 here, and that hand is actually supposed to be a fold, so my opponent shouldn't stack off there. Against the pot, like he's just not doing well enough against my stack off range. He will be dominated too often against aces, and therefore he should actually fold this combination. Interesting hand for sure. Again, if you want to dive deeper into it, check out the video. Okay, let's get rid of this, move back to the actual hand here, and move on to the next hand. Here we are sitting, again, PLO 25 cent, 50 cent. We are sitting in the cutoff, ace 10-9-6 double. We open raise, my opponent in the button calls. The big blind squeezes, and first of all, we have a decision here. Do we potentially want to 4-bet bluff this combination, or is this a call? What would you do here? I think most of us will definitely call here, but I know that some of these combinations are actually also potentially 4-bet bluffing, especially if the big blind is capable of 3-betting and then folding versus the 4-bet, for example, with kings or queens. Anyway, I do come in for the call. My opponent there also calls. We flop middle pair and then nut flush draw. The big blind pots. We don't have much of a decision here. I think, I mean, we are deeper for sure with the button, so that does make it a little bit interesting. But I do still think that we just want to get it in here on the flop by raising. Like we have a lot of equity against most of my opponent's stack of ranges. So by calling, and then the button maybe calls, and then if we hit a blank on the turn, like we're not that happy anymore to stack off. So I actually like the raise here. My opponent also stacks off, and we lose here against ace king 8, the big blind. And the button shows up with queen jack 10-4, so he has 2 pair actually. So very wide and weak hand, not a hand you want to come in for the cold call in the first place. One question that I have here though is pre-flop, should we potentially 4-bet this combination? So let's jump into PLO Trainer, which is a software freely available now in the PLO Mastermind. If you want to learn more about it, check out the link below the video here, which links you to PLO Mastermind directly, or join our Discord channel, of course, where you can learn more about what we're doing currently in the PLO Mastermind. Anyway, we are going to check out here whether this hand could be a potential 4-bet here pre-flop. So we're opening up a low stakes rake environment. We are sitting in the cutoff. The button calls. The big blind squeezes, and we have a decision to make. So I'm going to download the ranges for the cutoff now. And we're going to see whether ace 10-9-6 might be one of those combinations to 4-bet with. You can see we're 4-betting 12%. Obviously aces, always a 4-bet here. Let's give you guys some ideas here. Oh, let's hide this one. Yeah, aces, always a 4-bet here. Ace 10-9-6. You can see that the double suited version, if I filter for double suited, you can see that the double suited version is actually a mixed strategy. There are some 4-bets here. There are some calls. We can really go all directions with this combination. If you look at hands that don't have a pair in there, so this is this, and that are double suited. Oh, wait. Sorry about that. So should be this here. So double suited hands that don't have a pair. You can see ace queen jack 10, ace jack 10-9, ace 10-8-7. Like all the best ace high double suited hands make sense to come in for the 4-bet there. And here we have some lower cards as well. So ace 10-8-7. Ace 9-8-7. So we definitely put in some 4-bets with like these double suited rundowns. Ace 8-7-6, ace 9-7-6. So you see the point. So this hand, it would be fine to 4-bet. It's also fine to call. I think the less fold equity you have pre-flop, the more you should lean towards calling. Okay, let's go back. Move on to the next hand. Sitting in the big blind. queen 10 7 7. We got an early position or an MP player raise here. We're playing PLO 100 this time. And let me open up, show like this. This is good. So in dollars, yeah. Okay. So we call here queen 10 7 7 single suited. I'm not sure whether pre-flop is a call. Like, we are pretty disconnected. We have a 10 high suit, a queen high suit. We don't have that absolute nuttiness, what you're looking for, a multi-way pot. So I wouldn't be surprised if it's actually a fold, but I'm not too sure about the pre-flop. I think it's fine, but it's not a very high EV one if it would be correct. So we're flopping pretty nice here. Bottom set with the queen high flush draw and a 10 blocker. We check on an ace-high board out of position. We don't have a leading range here, three-way. Now, the MP player pots and the cutoff comes in for the pot size raise. So it's a pretty interesting situation. Like, I don't think we can fold here. Like, first of all, like, we have bottom set and a queen high flush draw. So I don't think folding is anything reasonable here for sure. We have a 10 blocker. But the MP player can definitely have ace-ace here for sure. And against aces, like, we're not doing that great, of course. It's likely both opponents will have, like, either one has aces and the other has, like, a strong combo draw, for example. And against those ranges, like, we do okay, but we're definitely not crushing. I'm fine stacking off here. We do stack off, which makes sense, I think. My opponents come in as well. The beautiful turn, quaddies. We are winning here. The river brings a flush also, and my opponents showed up with top pair and a nut flush draw and a gutter to the straight, and my other opponent had like a strong rep with a flush draw. So I think pretty standard, especially also the cutoff is raised makes sense on the flop. I wonder whether the MP player should pot here or maybe go a little bit smaller. I think smaller is also fine. Keep weaker flush draws in more often, keep weaker ace-x in more often that he's dominating. By potting, he's narrowing his opponent's ranges down quite well. Quite a lot, basically, so that's not that beneficial, I would say. So definitely interesting, and obviously very happy with this win. What I quickly want to see here is whether pre-flop is actually a call. So let's open PLO Trainer again, open a clean setup here. Playing low stakes, MP player raises, cutoff calls. We sit in the big blind just to see whether queen 10 7 7 is actually a call or whether it is not. So here we go, queen 10 7 7. And you can see that it's very marginal. Like, the double suited ones are mixing between calling and folding, and the EV of calling is like just a tiny bit better than folding. So yeah, don't overvalue those hands, I would say. Let's move on to the next hand. Ace Jack, Jack 3, double suited. We're playing PLO 25 cent, 50 cent here. My opponent in this early position raises. He's short stacked, so I think 3-betting here makes total sense. We got a cold caller in the small blind, a caller in the big blind, and the early position player also calls, which is somewhat of a surprise that he doesn't just get it in. We flop an overpair and a nut flush draw. Pretty nice. The board is not the greatest, but also definitely not the worst here with the two low cards there. All players check. I think potting here is the way to go. My opponents come in, stack off. And we actually win on the river with the 3 of clubs here. My opponents did show up with top pair, an open-ender, and a flush draw. Makes sense, of course. And then 5, 4, 3 deuce. Doesn't make sense. Definitely a fold pre-flop, and also on the flop, it's not that great even, I would say. Okay, let's move on to the next one. Ace, Queen, 10, Jack. Playing PLO 25 cent, 50 cent again. We open raise in MP. We get a cold call or a squeezer in the button. We have a decision here, and I think calling here is fine. We are connected enough, and we have that nut suit, so calling here is definitely okay. The cutoff also calls, and we flop top pair with a backdoor straight draw and some overcards to the 9. First of all, we want to start off with a check here. My opponent has a range advantage here, having all the aces there. So we should check my full range. Cutoff also checks and my opponent comes in for a 2/3 pot size bet, which is interesting. I think he could use like maybe a pot bet sizing and then like a smaller sizing, I would say. Like the board is so dry, like all his aces, they don't necessarily want to bet full pot here, I would say. Or his aces don't necessarily want to bet full pot that often here, but also 2/3 doesn't really benefit him that much, I would say. I think betting 1/3 or half pot from his perspective is fine with his range here, just because he will do so well with all his aces and he wants to get value. He doesn't want to bet 2/3 pot and then seeing me fold ace X, for example. So not too happy about his sizing. At least I wouldn't choose it. I think we have a call here. Like against aces, we're obviously not in great shape. But against any other ace X or basically any other hand, like we are still fine. The fact that we also have one ace in our hand makes it a little bit less likely he has aces, of course. And against any other ace X, even 2-pair hand, like we do pretty well here with all the overcards, the backdoor straight draw potential. Yes, we don't have a backdoor flush draw, but I think this hand is good enough to call and then see a turn here, basically. What sizing does he choose, actually? Yeah, he does. He does bet small, actually. He does bet small. Interesting. I thought he was betting bigger. Let's see. So 24 in the middle. We check. He bets. He does bet small. Sorry, guys. I thought he was betting bigger. But he does come in for a small bet, which I like, actually. So it's good. He bets like 7 or 8, so that's totally fine. I misread the situation. So we call. The cutoff also calls, maybe a little bit surprising, and the turn is the 8. So we turn a wrap here. And I think we want to pot here, really. Like, yes, against aces, we're not in the greatest shape, but we still have a lot of outs. Against 2 pairs, we're fine. But if we pot, like, there's even some chance that my opponents will actually fold, which would be great. And if the money goes in, we are still okay in a sense. So I like potting here actually quite a bit. And my opponents do stack off, and we river a straight here with the queen. And also on the second run out, we river a straight. My opponent actually did have aces here. And the other guy had 10, 10, 9, 6. So a very light float on the flop with middle pair. Turning a flush draw, yeah, seems definitely light and not too great in my opinion. Okay, let's move on. Ace, ace, jack, deuce. We are playing PLO 25 cent, 50 cent again. We face a 3-bet by MP. We come in for the 4-bet. And my opponent calls. Flop is 9, 5, deuce, two-toned. We have the ace of clubs. We have a gutter with the ace deuce. We have an overpair, of course. We decide to pot. My opponent comes in for the raise. And we are in terrible shape on the flop against a hand that is dominating me very heavily. Ace 7, 6, 5. Wrap, flush draw, I mean everything basically. So not the greatest hand to be up against on the flop. Let's see whether this makes sense from my perspective here. Because I do have a flop simulation here open. Or I do have it at least. Just to give you guys an idea, is potting the flop correct or not? You can see here that we are actually potting 70% of our range and we're checking 30. So it's definitely not a board that we're going to stack of our entire range with. So keep that in mind. I see people too often potting just everything here, just never checking basically. And that's not how you want to do it. If you look at the equity graph here, basically how both ranges interact with each other, you can see that the button, which is the blue line, or which is the button, which is the red line, the in-position player, is actually doing fairly well, especially in the first like 30% of range versus range. So he will also have like some very strong hands, some good draws here, and he will be able to stack off quite a bit here. So don't make the mistake of stacking off everything here. Our hand though, ace, 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 jack, deuce, is fine enough to pot here. Like we have a gutter, we have an overpair. We unblock kings, queens, those kind of hands that we are in good shape against. We have a straight draw with our hand. And I think potting here. And you can see it here is the correct play. So totally fine here. My opponent, of course, holding 8-7-6-5. I mean, not much to say. He is in great shape against my hand. Okay, let's move on to the next hand. Ace 5-4-3, single suited to the ace. I come in for the cold call here, and I'm not sure whether I like it. I'm gonna quickly jump into PLO Trainer for a second to see whether this makes sense, because it doesn't feel too great, really. We're playing against MP. But like, would you call here or not? Might be fine, actually. We have the nuttiness, and we need some connection also with those low straight runouts, of course. So this hand then makes sense. And you can see that the single suited one with the nut suit is actually a call. So seems good. We come in for the call. We face a squeeze from the big blind. The early position or the MP player that open raises also calls now. We have a clear call now in position. The small blind calls as well. So we're four-way heading to the flop here, guys. So let's see what is going to happen. And we flop a massive hand here. We flop the nut flush in a four-way squeeze spot. Great situation. My opponent's check. The early position player actually, or the MP player again, like he does come in for a large bet. I decide to raise it up here. And the money actually goes in, which is great, of course. And we are up against two flush draws that we are dominating. So great situation, great outcome. Very happy with it. This is not a hand you want to squeeze here. It's a little bit too wide, a little bit too disconnected. So I don't like that. I also don't like the open from MP here with this hand. I also think that is a little bit too optimistic there with this disconnected hand. So not in love with those plays, really. Anyway, we take down a great pot here. Moving on to this hand here. A limper on the button. We're playing PLO 50 cent 100 here. PLO 50 cent $1 basically. We got a limper. The small blind raises it up. We come in for the 3-bet here with ace, ace, king, 5. Makes sense. Now the small blind min 4 bets here, which is interesting. We come in for the 5-bet to 97 here. My opponent calls. And we flop a beautiful board here, top set on a very dry and disconnected board. My opponent checks. We come in for a small bet here of like 10%, a little bit more. My opponent calls. Beautiful turn here, making our hand the super nuts here, of course, with top boat. My opponent checks again, makes sense with his full range. We bet small again. My opponent calls. The river is a 6. My opponent checks again. We shove here all in. And my opponent calls. He shows up with the beautiful Jack 10 9 deuce. So he min 4 bets, calls my 5-bet with a very disconnected hand. And then this board, this run out obviously is like pretty good for my situation here. So very happy with that hand. Okay, last hand of today's session, guys. We face an early position open and a 3-bet from MP. I do decide to call here with 8, 7, 6, 4 double suited. The small blind comes in for the cold 4-bet here. Early position calls. MP player gets it in here. He's committed now with his entire stack. We have a clear call now closing the action. And we're flopping bottom 2 pair, an open-ended straight draw and a backdoor flush draw. The small blind pots. He folds in early position. And I think don't think there's too much benefit in calling really here. I think we should just stack off here. We do stack off. Turn is a 6 and the river is a 9, which is a very bad card for our hand. But luckily we win. He has ace, queen, jack, 10. So he flops a wrap, no flush draw, no backdoor flush draw, no overpair. The MP player actually wins part of the pot with his kings. But we take down the biggest part of the pot here. And yeah, that's obviously very happy result if you look at that river. yeah, so those were the first biggest hands of 2020. I will make another video with like the other 11 hands basically that I did play lately or last year basically that are bigger than 200 big blinds. Hope you enjoyed this one. Get some cool big hands, some takeaways maybe even. And yeah, if you have any questions, obviously let me know. And I hope to see all of you around in the chat or in our Discord channel for the PLO Mastermind. Okay, take care, guys. Have a great day and good luck at the table. And already, Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Bye bye.